So this is our next section from the AQA syllabus approach to King Lear, looking at sections of the play that could be set as a text for paper 1, the tragedy paper. We're going to look this time at Act 1, Scene 3 in its entirety and the beginning of Act 1, Scene 4, the first 7 lines of it. And that's because this is the section that appeared in the paper in 2024. So we're going to revisit that. We'll look at our usual tactics. So let's locate the passage. It's just after the section in which we saw the subplot unfold, and we saw Edmund cynically manipulating things and treating his father very badly and his brother very badly and being a glamorous and cool anti-hero. But what we've done here is obviously reflect back to the main plot, which was part of the first scene that we watched and the main part of it. And now we're seeing the consequences of what happens when Lear makes the stupid error in that first scene. What is Goneril going to do about it? Well, she's going to treat Lear very badly. And she's going to, in this case, as we'll see, create a situation in which Lear will argue with her and then leave her castle where he's supposed to be staying for the month. So she's bringing it to a head deliberately, and there's a cynicism here that's not quite as powerful and direct as Edmund's, but in its own way shows that Edmund and she are quite alike. We also look at the end of this particular section at the beginning of the next scene. As it was printed on the paper in 2024, you got the first speech in Act 1, Scene 4, which was Kent coming out of his banishment in order to return by disguising himself. And that's quite an interesting contrast between what we see before that. So what we see in the main sequence here is Act 1, Scene 3, and we see Goneril addressing Oswald. Well, what's Oswald like? He's a bit more than just a plot device in that he has a bit of a personality of his own, but it's a kind of different kind of cynicism and badness, if you like. There's none of the glamour and appeal that we see in the way that, for instance, Edmund has behaved. He's got no power, no energy. He's a creep. He's an unpleasant character. He has no redeeming qualities, really. And here we see him trying to kind of appease his mistress. Interesting, he's a sort of reflection upon Edgar, who we've just seen, in that he, like Edgar in the previous scene, says very little in this scene. So there's a powerlessness associated with that. But the powerlessness here is also a matter of him just trying to do what he can to butter his mistress up, to do what she wants, to be a yes man, if you like, quite literally. So we'll see the power and energy of Goneril as she makes her move against her father. We'll see the kind of almost silent response by Oswald, just agreeing with her. So a lot might be conveyed in body language and facial gestures and things like that. You know, to what extent do Goneril and Oswald have any kind of relationship? It's mentioned later in the play that, Regan says to Oswald, are you of your mistress's bosom? Are you kind of having an affair with her? And he kind of says, well, me? So what do we make of that? Different productions play it differently. It's not usually played that there's any great relationship between Oswald and Goneril, because I think that perhaps rather diminishes Goneril's power, that she should bother with someone like Oswald, because throughout the play he's seen as being sneaky in a snivelling kind of weak and feeble way. He's a coward, and so we kind of think, well, why would Goneril be attracted to him? We can see why she's attracted to Edmund when they start to get involved in that love triangle with Edmund, Regan and Goneril, but we can't see why Goneril would bother with someone like Oswald. We can see why he would want her to. We can see his desire to please her and to be accepted by her, because it's a power move for him. What do we see from Goneril in this scene? We see her justifying her position. Now, that's the question that the scene asks is, whose side do we stand on here? We've seen some cynicism from Goneril at the end of Act 1, Scene 1. So we might think, yeah, with the rhetoric that she put in the middle of the scene to answer the love test, and then the way she talks with Regan at the end, that she is a schemer in a rather sneaky and nasty way. But we've also seen Lear behave horribly, and we can kind of see a backstory there of what a terrible father he was and how awful it must be to be a child of someone like that, and how he openly plays favourites with Cordelia and makes Goneril and Regan feel unwanted and unloved. So there's a certain element of revenge here and a certain element of justification. And she does justify her behaviour here by suggesting that he's behaving badly, he's being rude and violent and unpleasant, and so are his knights. And so she's got a reason to complain. So, how far do we side with Goneril, and how far do we think she's just exaggerating that for her own purposes because she wants rid of him so that she can have a sort of easier life and indulge in the things she wants to do without having to answer to him. Notice the fool gets mentioned here for the first time. He becomes part of the general chaos and madness of the play, really. And, he adds another dimension to it. There's a lot of layers of complexity in the play, and everything's quite chaotic. And we'll see that also in the language that Goneril uses in describing her father's behaviour there, with words like wrongs, flashes, crime, gross, and then riotous, upbraids, trifle, and so even hunting suggests a violence and an energy which is throughout the play. In every little detail, things are bubbling up and are furious, really. And she's quite furious. I'll not endure it has that power and directness which we see from her and from Regan and from Edmund in the play, speaking very forcefully and immediately. No flourishes, no empty words, just absolute clarity and absolute purpose. So she begins to look a little bit like Edmund there. But she's sneaky. I suppose you could say Edmund's sneaky too with his whole use of the letter. But here she says to Oswald, just be a bit slack of your former services. Don't do as good a job. I'll have it come to question, she says in her second big speech. I want it to be questioned. I want this issue to come out that you're not being a good servant to Lear, so that then I can get into an argument and then he'll storm off, basically, ironically, into a storm. There's a certain passivity of say I am sick, which just makes her seem slightly less forceful than Edmund and a little bit more sneaky and manipulative in a way that we don't find as appealing, perhaps. We also find Oswald, fairly bland and empty in this scene, but he does agree without question to do everything his mistress wants him to. And so something in his body language and voice might give him this sort of attitude of a rather snivelling and creepy and overly officious sort of servant who's trying to please his mistress in every way possible. She's quite dismissive of her father, idle old man, trying to manage the things you've given away. So there's a sense there of a dismissiveness of him. Is that justified anger at a pretty grim and horrible father, or is it a sort of cynical desire to take power at all costs? She echoes the language that Edmund used in his forged letter when she talks about all men are babes and fools that must be used with checks and flatteries. There's a suggestion there of the things that Edmund was saying about the young taking power over the old. And that seems to be the flavour of the play, but the play seems to be saying that that's not a good thing, that the young are going to take power when they don't know what to do with it, because they're not good people. They're cruel people, and they're going to take power when they don't deserve it. Oswald's well, madam, is perhaps tense with all sorts of possible suggestions, but it might mean nothing. It might just be a throwaway line. But it's interesting that she has 3 goes at telling him in case he hasn't got the message, and in case we haven't got the message. Shakespeare's telling us, let his knights have colder looks, so that I may speak. So again, the 3rd time she tells him, bring it to the head, make something happen that will make Lear unhappy. So the audience is given absolutely no doubt as to what is going to happen here. That this is deliberate on Goneril's part, So we're being prepared, as we are several points in the play. Shakespeare prepares us what we're about to see and gives us a way of looking at it. And here is ways to say, this is something that is very much Goneril's intention. It's not an accident or Lear's fault, really. So there might be a beginning of a shift towards sympathy towards Lear and away from that first scene where we didn't really sympathise with him very much at all and thought of him as a rather angry, unpleasant and abusive man. She also mentions that she's going to write to her sister, so we see that's the way that the two of them are working together, and that Goneril's the driver of that. She's the first person to take him into her house and then to get rid of him, but she's going to make sure that Regan's on her side too. So, the bad characters, if you like, are building up a sort of wall against the good characters and plotting together. Now, there's an immediate contrast in the last part of this sequence, which is the beginning of the next scene, when we see Kent as one of the most loyal and good characters in that broad sense. And he even talks about my good intent. He only wants to do good things. Our only doubt about Kent is, why are you so loyal to this awful man? But he talks about his master whom thou lovest. Talking of himself, I love my master. And that makes us wonder about the backstory. Why does Kent, seem sensible enough, actually love Lear? Why does Cordelia, who's thoughtful and even philosophical about things, why does she continue to love Lear? So there must be something there that makes him lovable, and that has to be played as well through the play, I think. Has to be given a sense of why people do want to follow him and do want to help him. Here, Kent and later the Fool do all they can to help Lear. Of course, the irony is that Kent is helping Lear by disguising himself, by breaking a law, by going against what he's been told he should do. So there's deception, but it's the opposite kind of deception from what we've seen from Goneril. So where Goneril deceives purely for her own gain, Kent deceives in order to help. Now we'll see this as one of the little soliloquies Kent gets. He gets another little soliloquy towards the end of Act 2, or rather in the middle of Act 2, I should say, really in Act 2, Scene 2, when he is put in the stock. So we get moments where Kent confides with us. There's none of that sense of conspiracy or glamour that we get from Edmund's confiding with us. It's a much more factual and plain style. And Kent, in comparison to Edmund, is rather dull, but of course he's there right at the end. He's one of the few characters that survives to the end of the play, although he seems to suggest he may be about to go end his own life now that his master's dead. So on thine allegiance, if we remember from Act 1, Scene 1, his allegiance is everything. It's what he lives by. He stands for something and he's going to live by that at all costs. And that's very different from what we've seen with Goneril. It's also different what we've seen from what we see later, certainly from Oswald. Oswald is not quite the loyal character that Kent is. He is loyal to his mistress, but it also always seems that he's loyal to her in order to gain something for himself, because he thinks there's something in it for him. We haven't quite understood that yet, but we will do later on when we see him in the play, how he behaves in a cowardly fashion in front of Kent, and later on when he attempts to kill Gloucester. So things are built up, things have happened quickly. In terms of the tragedy, what we're seeing here is you make a mistake and you pay for it very quickly. There's no waiting around, there's no build up to disaster here. Disaster happens almost straight away, and that's the energy of this play. Things go bad very quickly. A tragedy doesn't take a long time to unfold. If we compare it to other tragedies like Macbeth or Othello, it takes a long time for the disaster to unfold in those plays, and it takes much less time here. Lear is going to be in trouble before the end of Act 1, and here we see the bad characters thriving and the good characters struggling to cope with